Hello there, my friend. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boice. I am Boice. This is my podcast you are listening to. I am your podcasting host. Thank you for tuning in. If this happens to be your first time listening, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, both established and emerging, musicians, singers, singer-songwriters, music therapists, and on this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to a music writer, music journalist, Lance Scott Walker. He is the author of Houston Rap Tapes, which is a fascinating oral history of Houston's hip-hop and the scene. Lance is originally from Texas himself and based in Brooklyn. Really enjoyed talking to him. We discussed growing up in Texas, his getting into rap music and later punk music. We discussed his many miscellaneous jobs before landing on his career as a journalist. And of course, we talk about Houston Rap Tapes, the book, and its evolution. Initially, it was a coffee table book collaboration between Lance and the photographer Peter Best. But in Lance's oral history, which came out last year, he interviews internationally known artists like the Ghetto Boys and Paul Wall. He also talks to pivotal regional artists and new artists on the scene making new music. If you love hip-hop, or even if you don't, this is an absolutely incredible read. It's not just about the music, it's also about the artists' lives and social issues. I can't recommend it enough. So here it is, my conversation with Lance Scott Walker. Enjoy. You're from Galveston.
Galveston, Texas.
Galveston, Texas. How far is that from Houston?
Where I'm from, it's 45 minutes from Houston, but where I'm from in Galveston, it's about an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm from the west end of Galveston, so kind of out in the country.
Mm-hmm. And what was life like there?
It's interesting. You know, it's an island, so, you know, you have the sort of, you know, you have geographical boundaries that sort of dictate, you know, what goes on the island versus what goes on the mainland. So, you know, it's a kind of a it's kind of a petri dish in some ways, you know. So you're attuned to some things that you might otherwise, or should I say, you're not attuned to some things that you might be if you were in a big city on the mainland. And you're sort of oblivious to maybe how mixed together things are because you're all on the same island. So you just, you know, all the different cultures, that kind of thing, you just get along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you not realize, okay, so there's TV, right?
Uh-huh.
And you see a different world on TV, or
Yeah.
is there no connection between what's going on?
Yeah, for sure there is. Yeah, but it's also, you know, like, at least for me growing up, I didn't have cable when I was growing up. So
Okay.
television was limited, you know, and, you know, the whole atmosphere of the island is just, I don't know how to explain it. It's different. It's really, and I don't think I really appreciated it or understood the difference until I moved to Houston, which obviously, you know, I moved to Houston day after I turned 19.
Okay.
No, you know, just a coincidence.
Yeah.
But, you know, I don't think I realized, you know, how kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily Galveston is insular, but, you know.
Is it suburban or?
Parts of it. Yeah, parts of it are very old because there was a big hurricane that swept through there, you know, 119 years ago, 118 and a half years ago, I guess you'd say, and killed, you know, 8,000 people, wiped out a good chunk of the city. And so the, you know, so a lot of the city was rebuilt right then. And in the years that followed, a lot of the city was protected. So there were, you know, deed restrictions put on a lot of properties. So a lot of Galveston is really old. A lot of Galveston is 100 and something years old. And because a lot of stuff was rebuilt then, there was a grade raising where, you know, all of the houses on the east end of the island were lifted up 8 feet. Some spots they were lifted up a little bit higher. They dredged in mud from the bottom of the bay of Galveston Bay, and they lifted the island up, and then they built a 17-foot seawall. So there was a lot. There was a lot done to it, and you know, a lot that helps it retain a lot of its history. You know, in a way that Houston absolutely does not. You know, Houston just knocks everything down, wipes over everything.
Were you going to Houston
Yeah,
into
growing
the
up,
big city.
Yeah, definitely, because that's the big city. That's where everything's going on. So there would be different. Family takes you out for whatever the event might be. There was stuff that was happening in Houston, just wasn't happening in Galveston, and but never for anything that was like mine.
Okay.
But backing up a little bit, I wanted to just say though that because of some of the limitations of Galveston, I think that was definitely a something that helped make me creative. You didn't have everything right there. Not everything was given to you. You kind of, you like anywhere, I guess. You just got little slivers of the things that interested you, and you had to really search. But for me, I was glad I grew up in the country, and I was glad I didn't have cable television, and I was certainly glad I didn't have the internet. Because it forced me to be creative, to draw, to write, to read, all those things.
Okay. And when would you have heard like music from Houston rap? And were you into rap in general?
Yeah, I was when I was in middle school. Was 1984, 85, 86. So. I was born in 1973, same year hip-hop was born. So I kind of aged along with it, but I became aware of it when I was in 6th and 7th grade. And not before that. I had a few tapes before that, but that was Fat Boys, Run DMC, UTFO, Roxanne Shante, Curtis Blow, all that stuff broke when I was in middle school, and my middle school just went nuts. They went nuts for it. It was like, it was ours. It belonged to us, and I wouldn't say even so much me, because, I got caught up in the fray because everybody else was into it and everybody else was playing this music. They discovered it, not me. I was glad they discovered it. Like anything, you're just glad that you have access to anybody, turning you on to anything. And, so there was that. And then that led me to punk rock. Through Africa Mambata, led me to the group Time Zone, his group Time Zone, which featured John Lydon on one song in 1985, and that drew me into punk rock. And I kind of never looked back, although I was into punk rock and hip hop, forever beyond that. But punk rock was like what I really pursued. But then in high school, probably 10th, 11th grade, maybe 10th grade, that's when Ghetto Boys started breaking. More to the point where we heard him in Galveston, and this was still GHETTO Ghetto Boys, like the early Ghetto Boys before Scarface. I think Willie D was already involved.
Where would you have heard them at?
At school.
Okay.
Yeah, people driving, and the reason, and Ghetto Boys helped themselves in this because there was the song Assassins from one of their early records, which they later on re-recorded with the kind of newer members, but they go, Ghetto Boys, Ghetto Boys. That's how I knew that's how I knew they were. Yeah, they helped themselves out that way. So, but along with that was the information, hey, Ghetto Boys are from Houston. Whoa. That's just right up the road.
Yeah.
Everything else that you heard, everything else you listened to was from New York or LA or wherever. And I knew that was special.
Yeah. So were you aware of like the differences between like the different East Coast, West Coast, and that Houston had its own particular sound? No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I knew some Houston rap. I knew Raheem, I knew Royal Flush, I knew Def 4. I knew just the Rap-A-Lot stuff really, because that was much more accessible, and you knew about Rap-A-Lot, because it was just such a catchy name, and everybody was so stoked. Oh God, there's a local label, releasing Ghetto Boys and stuff. So no, I wasn't wise to all that. I just heard the music as it was. As a fan of punk rock and earlier hip hop, and just the good stark simplicity of great writing and songwriting. And where were you hearing your punk rock from?
Oh wow, I got access to punk rock tapes from other people I went to school with, other kids, I'm talking about like, out of classes of hundreds of kids, I probably, there were probably 6 or 7 other people that were into punk rock. And luckily, there were a few that were older than me who gave me the time of day. So I got a lot of tapes from them. But I also, because of the fact that I lived on the west end of Galveston and I lived on the bay side of Galveston, it's an island, there's a bay between Galveston and the mainland. I could pick up Houston radio. And people on the east end of Galveston could not. Not as well, anyway.
So they gave you the edge.
It gave me the edge. And so I could pick up and part of what really turned me on to hip hop, in the beginning also was that I could hear Kids Jam. And Kids Jam was I wrote about in the book was a radio show in Houston on Saturday mornings. I didn't know it was called, I don't remember knowing that it was called Kids Jam. I just remember you could hear hip hop on the radio on the left end of the dial early on Saturdays. And on Monday nights, this is a little bit later 80s, on Monday nights there was a punk rock show on the radio on the Pacifica station in Houston, KPFT, 90.1 FM.
Okay.
And so there was like a 3-hour punk rock, hip hop, not hip hop, sorry, punk rock, hardcore, experimental noise, what was then called industrial, but was more like kind of experimental noise, soundscapes, that sort of thing. And I picked that up, and there were these two really saucy guys, Chuck Roast and Austin Caustic, that hosted the show, and they were just really sarcastic and just wonderfully enthusiastic about the music, and just, let information pour out every time they talked about something. It was, I just can't imagine my development as a lover of music without having listened to that show for all those years.
So hearing this and knowing it's coming from Houston, does this make you, like, you moved there at 19, is this like driving you to move there? That there's this bigger world in Houston for you? Yeah,
because I just kept going there. By the time, I graduated high school in 1991, and I stayed a year in Galveston and went to college there for a year. And I was just going to Houston all the time. All the show, you got to think about it. Like, this is 1991, so this is the first year of Lollapalooza. Okay. This is the first year that, like, Nirvana's breaking. All of these groups that we had known for years as sort of underground groups. Not totally underground, but underground in the sense that you weren't hearing about them on a large scale. Even Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction. All of these bands were starting to kind of flip. The mainstream was being flipped.
They were still alternative.
They were still alternative. In the term alternative was just kind of coming to fruition. But there was so much going on. So many groups forming and touring and doing well. And there were in Houston, it was a big enough city where there were promoters who were making that happen. Like, let's bring this band through. Let's bring this band through. So I was just there all the time. Yeah. And it finally got to the point where I was like, I'm going to move there, because the idea of being able to just drive down the street and go to a show. Wow. Or just drive down the street and go to a record store, and not have to drive an hour to go to a record store and use up half my money I would have spent on records on gas.
Are you scared in the big city once you get there?
No, no. I don't remember that. That's not to say that I knew the whole city, though. I think if I went all around the city, I probably would have been pretty disoriented. But the Montrose and the Heights and Third Ward were the areas where I was going. And I got to know those pretty well, and even before I ever moved there. So, but I just loved it. I just loved Houston. I just thought Houston was such a great place, and it was so full of amazing things and amazing stuff. And I loved how people embraced things. And, like I said, growing up on an island where there's not a whole lot going on, it forces you to be creative, and it helps you kind of focus in on things that really inspire you and interest you. And in Houston, they were just in such... they were just everywhere. Yeah. And I never got tired of it.
Yeah. So what are you writing, or like, what is your creativity? How's that coming out?
I was playing music. I was writing lyrics, and I was writing some, but I wasn't really writing. I was writing lyrics, which is legitimate writing, and that's where my wordcraft came about, because I started playing in bands and writing songs when I was 16, 17 years old. So, by the time I moved to Houston, I'm 19, 20. I'm playing drums in bands. And so, and I got drafted into a couple bands when I got to Houston because I was a new drummer. Okay, well, here's a guy who can play, and he's, he's not attached to other bands. So I was playing in bands all over Houston and touring. And then in 1993, I think it was, I started DJing at Rice University. Not because I went to school there, but because I knew people who DJ'd there and went to school there, and they knew that I knew a lot about music, and that I was enthusiastic and I could talk about music. And so one of them said, "Hey, why don't you come DJ at the station?" I was like, "Well, I don't go to school there." No, don't worry about it. So I DJ'd there for years. You start with like 4 a.m. to 7 a.m., 1 a.m.
I did that.
Yeah. But I loved it because, I could spend my time, I could put on long records and just dig through the stacks and just learn about stuff and tape stuff. I'd bring tapes down there. They had another room where I could go in and like, I'm going to record this record, because that's how you did it back then. That's how you expanded your collection. Yeah. And then, you'd always have like I remember specifically there was a guy who worked in a junkyard at night. They had 24-hour security, and he would call. And he would call the station and go, hey, can you play that Nip Driver's cover of If You Never Been Mellow? Can you play that for me again? And so I loved that part of it. It was just like radio is such a beautiful medium, and it's kind of like writing. I mean, you sort of feel like you're broadcasting into nothingness, and then every once in a while there's this nugget of contact that gets volleyed back to you, echoes back to you, that just fills you up. It's not why you do it. You write because you have to, because you love it, and because you want to, and you have something to get out. And I feel like sharing songs on a radio frequency is the same sort of thing. It's different, but it's a different art form. But it's the sharing, and it's the imparting of, God, people shared this information with me. I want to share it with you guys, and I want to tell you about other stuff that's special. I didn't talk a whole lot on the radio, but I loved that part of it. But every once in a while, a little thing will bounce back like that, and you're like, oh wow, it's really redeeming for all the hours I put into this.
Were you looking to make it professional? Like either how the writing, like when did that become a professional thing for you? Writing
got professional. So I worked as a graphic designer. I worked in screen printing shops in Galveston, and when I moved to Houston, I was an artist. So I worked in Galveston. I worked in screen printing shop printing and working on screens, which if you know anything about the process of screen printing. So then when I moved to Houston, I learned how to use the camera. It was where you would shoot film positives, and so I could blow things up, I could shoot them, I could focus them and print film, and then I'd go through and put them on a light table, and I'd cut plates and make screens. And so I got really good at that, and so I did that for years. That was my trade. That's what I did, and which was a natural progression from punk rock. Yeah, because you punk rock, it's like, well, I want that Reagan Youth T-shirt, or I want that Faction T-shirt, or whatever, and I can't get it because they don't make it, or I've seen it in a skate magazine or whatever it was. I was a skateboarder all these years, and so you learn how to make shirts in a rudimentary way first. You learn how to make them at home with glue and paint and pantyhose stretched over a wooden frame. But then you graduate to more complex systems, and through that lineage of working in the arts, I started working in 1996. I started working in a service bureau, printing film for offset printing. So I wasn't doing like pre-press yet, but basically people would bring in files that they wanted, okay, well, I need to print film for this because this is going to go to print. Yeah. And like I said, I was working in a screen printing shop, but I had a friend who was working in this service bureau, and he said, you know a lot about art. You should come work with me at night. Just come spend a month, spend a few hours with me every night. And then at the end of that month, we'll go to my boss and we'll say, this guy knows how to do everything. Yeah. And that's what we did. And he's like, okay. And he gave me a job. And so then I started working with computers and printing film. And then in 1997, I started working as a graphic designer. And I did that for years. And then in 2000, 2001, all throughout, a lot of this stuff, overlaps. But in 1998, I started a record label called OJET. Okay. And so I was doing graphic design and layout and producing records and making records, playing in bands. And I think it was in 2000 or 2001, I got asked to write an article for a website because of the association with OJET. They were like, well, we would like people from, and I wish I could remember the name of this site. It doesn't exist anymore. I want to say it was called Tranka, Tranjka, but I might be wrong. But either way, they asked me to write an article, and I wrote something about Napster because that was what was happening then. Yeah. And, I did some research for it, and I, of course, interjected my own opinions into it, and I'm sure it was terrible. But whatever happened at this big ad agency where I worked as a graphic designer, I printed it at work. And then the guy who runs the content department comes over and he appears at my desk and he holds it up in front of me. He goes, did you write this? Did you write this? Yeah. I said, yeah. He goes, you can write. You should write for us. You should be a writer. You should move out of your department, move out of graphic production, move into content. Okay. I said, really? He said, yes.
You hadn't thought about that?
I hadn't thought about it. Yeah. No, did not cross my mind. I enjoyed the writing part of it. Yeah. I never thought about going that direction. I was an avid reader. I loved to read, but it just didn't cross my mind. And I was like, okay. And so we started going in that direction. I started doing some sessions with him and working with him. And then HP bought Compaq Computers, which was our main client for the ad agency I worked for. And right after that, just scores of us got laid off.
Yeah.
At the summer of 2001, right at the beginning of summer. So I got laid off. So I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw unemployment for the first time in my life, and I'm not going to work this summer. And that's what I did. And I just read and I wrote all summer. That summer of 2001, that's all I did was reading and writing and drinking beer. And it was great. It was one of the greatest summers of my life. And I did some freelance work, but for the most part, that was my focus. And
what were you planning to get from that? What were you thinking would happen from?
Galveston was a big influence on it because my grandmother and my mother's mother and my uncle, my mother's youngest brother, were avid hurricane enthusiasts. It would just, when you'd get around and talk to them, you'd sit in the living room, the conversation would it was almost funny. It was like you almost invite somebody to just watch this. Watch how long it takes. Set your stopwatch, and we'll get to talking about hurricanes in like 4 minutes. And it would happen every time. But this really inspired me to write about that. And so there was a kernel of an idea that came to life that summer, and that's what I was writing. Okay. I was writing hurricane stories. I was writing stuff that would eventually be a book. That was the idea. This will eventually be a book. And it was because I fell in love with reading and writing. I discovered Gabriel Garcia Marquez that summer. I discovered Evelyn Waugh that summer. I discovered, who else? I discovered Toni Morrison that summer. And, you take three elements like that, and your mind is completely rewritten, just the way you think about everything. It's just, oh, wow, God, I thought I knew something. I thought Hunter Thompson was the answer to so much that I was looking for. I thought all these other writers were the answer to something I was looking for, but no. And so, I'm not saying that the writing that I was producing could even be qualified as having been inspired by that, because it was nothing like that. But
it just opens you up.
It just opened me up. Yeah, it just opened me up. Yeah.
So from there, you were going to do that. Did you ever do the book on that?
Still working on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I'm still working on it. But it will, after the next book, it's the next one in line.
Okay.
And it has changed and grown over the years, and I'm really deep on it. Yeah, I've been working on it for years. Okay. And it's changed titles, and it's the structure has changed a lot, but I'm happy with where it is now. Okay. I'm certainly glad I didn't make any strides to finish it back then. Yeah. Good God.
So how'd you get to the original Houston rap? Because there's a book, coffee table book, right?
Yeah. Well, just to continue on that that timeline a little bit, so right around this time, I'm promoting shows in Houston. I'm booking shows, promoting shows. I'm playing in bands, and
you got like a million things.
I had a million things going on. I still do. That's still the way I do it. And all of them overlap, but really all of them fed each other. And all of them, in our sort of ADD society now, it's perfect for me. Yeah. Because I could, it's not to say that I would ever get tired of one thing, but you get to the point where you're like, okay, well, where's my energy flourishing? Where's it really coming out? It's like sometimes you sit down to work on something and it pulls you completely away, and you're like, no, I want to work on this. Why? Because it's in my heart right now. Yeah. I'm feeling it. It's in my blood. I have to do it. And then I'll come back to that other thing that has the deadline or whatever that is, which is usually how it works. Yeah. So anyway, but I say that to say that because of booking shows, I was in contact with Houston Press, which is the Village Voice paper of Houston. It was New Times back then. But the music editor, John Nova Lomax, which is descendant of Alan Lomax and John A.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's a great nephew. Oh, I should know that. But he said, hey, would you ever consider writing for Houston Press? I said, oh yeah. Because again, it's like by this point I had just so much information built up in my head about music. It's like, yeah, I could do that. I could totally do that. And so that was 2002. So I started writing professionally in 2002, not for a living. I was still doing graphic design, but I started writing professionally in 2002. And then so I moved from the Houston Press to the Houston Chronicle, which is the big daily newspaper in Houston, and I was writing about nightlife and about music for them. And so Peter Best comes along at that point. Peter Best had been in my life for 8 years already at that point, 2004. We met in 1996 when I was playing in those punk bands I was talking about, and I was playing guitar and singing, and this long-haired blonde kid would come up front taking pictures all the time. I was like, hey kid, what do you do with those pictures? I don't know, but he was still in high school. He didn't consider himself a photographer, but he was obviously getting there because he just took lots of pictures, and he had an eye, and he was brave enough, which I think is the biggest part, brave enough to get right up there and start taking pictures. Yeah. We live in a different era now where everybody's got a camera in their pocket. But that really wasn't the case back in the day,
So it really stand out.
It really stands out. And also just, I appreciate it and I respect it as a writer, writers are shy. I mean, even if you're going out in the field and you're doing interviews, photographer I'm so shy with the camera. It's not even funny. It's like, I'd just rather not take a picture of somebody. I fade out. But anyway, so I'd known him for years, and he was already living here in New York. He's from Houston area, but he said, hey, I'm going to start coming down to Houston and taking pictures of all the gangster rappers we grew up listening to. And he's 5 years younger than me, so he kind of knew, South Park Coalition, Gangsta Nip, of course he knew the Ghetto Boys, everybody did. And and it was a different, so we kind of had different knowledge of it, but he made a few trips down from New York, and after 2 or 3 trips, he's like, hey, look, I've been going out and taking pictures of these guys, and they end up telling me stories, and they're amazing stories, and my camera doesn't capture it. Like, you're a writer, you should come on board and write this with me, do a written component to my book, because it was going to just be a photo book. But he saw it way out. Once he started taking pictures, he could see it. That whole project, all of this is his vision. I never would have gone this direction if it wasn't for him. He was the one who picked me to help work on it with him, and then so I said because I loved like I said earlier, I loved Houston. I didn't know a whole lot about Houston rap music, but I knew a lot about music, and I knew a lot about stories in music, and I knew a lot about story. And just storytelling, because like I said, I'm from this island where everybody sits around, talks about hurricanes, and you've got all this crazy history. And so all of it appealed to me. And so I got on board with them. This is probably early 2005. I started working with them. Late 2004, early 2005. And we don't know who's going to publish it. We don't know what it's going to be called. We don't know how big it's going to be. Basically, if you're from Peter's angle, Peter didn't know any of that. He's just like, I just know I'm going to make it happen. Yeah. And he did. And so it took us, obviously took us years, I started working on it with him. And then end of 2006, I moved here to New York to work on a couple of different projects. And then my role became also the one who would go down there. And so we'd take trips down there together and, spend a few days or a week and drive around and go do interviews and take pictures.
Did you have any reticence that you hadn't really known the scene so deeply, but you felt like you could just go out and find out the information? That you needed to be like this long-term fan of Houston rap.
Well, I think it would have been wise if I would have, but no, I didn't.
Yeah.
I was, but really it goes back to what I was talking about with the camera. Like, Peter made me brave. I followed Peter. You go in behind a camera, and I can't illustrate how much easier that makes it. It really does, especially 'cause, like, I'm shy by nature. So to follow behind him, he's also shy, but just not with a camera.
Yeah.
And so once Peter comes in and he's doing his work, and most of that stuff he was shooting on film, but in the case where he could show a preview of something, people could see, oh wow, he's got an eye, he's doing some work. So having them trust Peter's part of it led to people trusting my part of it a lot more. Yeah. So no, I didn't have a reticence. It probably would have been healthier if I did, but I just knew I wanted to do it. And I knew
from reading the book, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
From reading the book, it seems like you were deeply immersed in the music. Like, I wouldn't have guessed that you weren't, from the questions you asked and the understanding of it.
Yeah, but if you look at when all those interviews are from, there's very few of them that are from the first couple of years.
Okay.
And the reason being is not because I didn't interview anybody, it's because I did, but a lot of those are like second or third interview, because then I was at to the point where I knew the music better and I could load more information into my questions, which is better for the reader. It's better for the interviewee, because then they know, okay, this guy's done his homework, and it's also good for the reader, because then you're not being so pretentious as to think that people know everything.
Yeah.
But you're listing it off as fact to not insult the intelligence of people who do know it, or maybe at least know those basic facts. So that's really tough is to strike that balance.
Okay. And how did you decide on that there would be the coffee table book, and then there's the oral history, and then the new version?
Well,
now.
Okay, so into this mix in probably 2006, somewhere in there, comes a Swedish archivist and artist and writer named Johan Kugelberg, who bought some prints from Peter on, Peter did a book on Norwegian black metal.
Okay.
This is before that book was out. And you'll see why, because Johan was the one who edited that book and really helped get it published. But Johan had bought some black metal prints from Peter, and so they became friendly through that process. And then Peter mentioned this project, and Johan was like, "I would like to edit that book, and I will help you shop it."
Okay.
And so then we just kept working on it, and I got to know Johan because I was already living here, and Peter and I just kept working on the format of the book, but also the thrust of it. I wouldn't want to say the narrative of the book, because I feel like we wanted to let the oral histories determine the narrative.
Barking up the wrong tree, I thought I had friends, but nobody calls me.
Big themes that come out.
It's a two-way street, they say. Got to the fork in the road and West Street.
Mass incarceration. Talk about
Right through my heart, you're tearing me apart.
codeine, promethazine.
Open up that wound and hit
history.
staggering. I came out the Taco Bell staggering. I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo, what am I doing here?
Music, but
Except my rejection to cut off my ear. Now I can't hear. Now I'm consumed by fear. I'm a big dumb moronic doofus.
Johan Kugelberg comes into the mix, and he's helping us shape this. We have meetings with him.
Driving to the show, that's when I knew.
Why wouldn't you shoot as high?
I needed a restroom,
Why
and I
wouldn't you
couldn't find a place to
Why
park.
wouldn't you? The book's not going to be anything like that. Why wouldn't you use that
I
as
couldn't hold it in any
inspiration?
longer.
Why
Now
not?
I'm somber because
It's
I
American
pissed
history,
my
Black
pants
history.
and I miss my favorite band.
It's American
Slaves
music.
were playing the
So
can
important.
I had to call up my
Who
friends,
else
tell them I
can do
couldn't
it?
make it.
So he
They
really
didn't believe
inspired
the
us.
story.
Really,
Driving out
it's not saying that we needed it, the inspiration.
Got a shower and
part,
did my
but,
laundry. I
really
wasn't
helped
very
us
fond of
shape
me.
that and
I hate myself
give
and
us
wanna die like
confidence.
Nirvana.
And then
Living in
when
this
the
melodrama.
part where he was going around shopping
Catch a break.
really ran its course, as in
let my soul levitate.
there were a few people who were interested, a few publishers who were interested, but they weren't that interested. And they weren't interested in doing what we really wanted to do. So then Johan says, well, I'm going to start a publishing house anyway, so let's do it. And, which I think was probably the plan in his back pocket the whole time. So it was his design, his idea. It was always going to be a coffee table book. But then maybe midway through this process, he calls me in for a meeting and he says, what would you think about taking all the leftover material that you've got for this book, because you're going to use, like we were talking about before we were recording, you're going to use 10% of it in this book, maybe 5% of it. What do you think about doing a book called The Houston Rap Tapes? And it'll just be interviews. And I thought, that's brilliant. Of course, I love that. Of course, I love that idea. My name was going to be flipped, and it would be by me. Of course, I love that idea. So all that, that idea came from him, and I jumped at the idea. I thought that was great, and so then we started in the process of we were compiling both at the same time.
Okay. How many hours do you think you recorded of interviews?
Oh wow, never been asked that before. Let's see. I've done hundreds of hours. Yeah, hundreds. Maybe not hundreds. Maybe not 200. I don't know. But a lot of the interviews are an hour and a half, 2 hours long. There's only a section in the middle that I used in the book. But there's a lot.
Yeah. And how do you decide what you wanted to say to get from each person? Like, this is the part out of this 90-minute interview with this person. This is what I'm going to call from it.
Oh, I just went and looked for the richest stories. I just, you can interview people about really basic things, and they'll tell you really basic answers. But if you let people open up, you know this. You interview professionally. You know this, and you get to that point where I wish I could remember where I heard this, but somebody was talking about in the process of interviewing how sometimes you don't jab that follow-up question right in there. You leave a little bit of breathing room, sometimes you'll find that they'll just open up an entirely different chapter, and you know that too.
Yes, the whole silence thing.
You give them a little bit of silence,
yeah.
especially if it's on the phone. Sometimes, just like, then they'd go off in that direction, and then you end up talking about something very different. And I always pursue that in the interview, because the interview is not about me, and it's not about what I'm necessarily trying to get from them from the book, although there are things that I definitely want to know and I want to ask them, but it's more like with some interview subjects, they'd never been interviewed before. They'd never gotten a chance to tell that story. They'd never, that might be their whole life story tied into that they hadn't sat down and told anybody like that. Maybe little pieces of it. Yeah. Sure, certainly little pieces of it to people around them, the people that they know and love, but not necessarily in a way like that where they can continue to just keep unfolding it over the course of an hour and a half.
And somebody's actually listening.
Yeah, and somebody's listening to them, and you just get better and better at listening.
Yeah.
And so I found the richest stuff. Of course, there were themes that kept coming up, and we knew we wanted to touch on those themes. But there were also some interviews that were just so far out of right field that I didn't have no idea that interview was going to go that direction, but I was so glad it did.
Yeah. So how do you think, like you talked about the themes, like this affected the music of the Houston rap scene? Like the drugs and gangs, and how did that affect the music?
Well,
from what you saw,
gangster rap is a product of the crack era. Because crack was a drug that hit the inner cities in the United States really hard, and it was super addictive, and it was kind of an elite drug at first, or so people thought, because it's from, make it from cocaine. Yeah. So but it quickly turned into something kind of crazy. Yeah. And not only that, but there was a kind of a pure crack in the beginning before it was really being cut with stuff. And so anybody who adopted it earlier was always chasing that pure high. And so it created conditions in the neighborhood where people were making a lot of money, and other people in that same neighborhood were spending a lot of money and losing a lot of stuff. Their houses, their cars, their jobs, their minds. Yeah. So that created really dark and tragic circumstances in the inner cities, and certainly in the neighborhoods where it hit. And so gangster rap arrives as a chronicle of that. It's reporting, from those front lines in a way that maybe some people would say, oh, that glorifies violence and blah, blah, blah. Well, sure, you could say that about some stuff, but, you keep hearing these stories over and over, and they're coming from different angles and in different directions. There's a truth to it that you couldn't reach anywhere else. Yeah. So, most of what we cover in the books is what you consider gangster rap. That's just that's the kind of the more popular, genre specific, hip hop that you hear in Houston. And so that was part of the narrative of the music. And then, 1990s come along, Ghetto Boys blew up, Ghetto Boys blew up on a national stage, and that really galvanized a whole generation of people who were younger than Ghetto Boys and saw them grow from this local group I was talking about, the first hip hop group in Houston to put out multiple records, and then evolve in a lineup, and then grow regionally and locally, and then regionally, and then nationally, and then they blow up. And right when I graduated high school was when Mind Playing Tricks came out. And so it's massive. You hear them everywhere. So that really galvanized a whole generation of artists to go in that direction. Okay. Ghetto Boys are gangster rap, no doubt. Ghetto Boys identify with Fifth Ward. Really, some of the original guys are from Fifth Ward, and Willie D, who wrote the foreword for Houston Rap Tapes, is from Fifth Ward, and that's certainly a neighborhood that was hit hard by crack. So you've got that part of it, and then you've got DJ Screw comes around and in the early '90s and starts to really pop, like 1994, 1995, 1996, and that's gangster rap too. It's slower. It's
talk about him.
It's more.
Almost everyone mentions him.
Oh yeah. DJ Screw was seminal. He was so important. My next book is about DJ Screw.
Yes.
Yeah, and he.
I suggested it.
You see? No. Oh yeah, right before I told you. Yeah. I appreciate that idea. Luckily, I'm most of the way done with it.
Yes, we were on the same vibe.
And but he was the one, when you hear hip hop that is slowed down, that influence comes from him. That influence comes from Houston, and specifically on a national scale, that influence comes from him. So he was making tapes. He's from Smithville, Texas, which is kind of out in the hill country, closer to Austin. But he moved to Houston in the mid '80s when a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in the book was really popping off, and he was already a turntablist. Then he's already spinning records. He was already starting to make tapes, and then in the early '90s, he started slowing down records with the pitch control, but he also started slowing down the tapes when he was recording them. He would slow them down in the recorder, in the 4-track recorder, which eventually grew into an 8-track, and then those tapes that people, then people started offering him money for the tapes. Hey, you make me a tape like that, pay $10. And then it graduated to, hey, I want these songs on this tape. Okay, $15.
Yeah.
And they'd leave him a list, and he'd put it in a shoebox, and he'd make the tape, and they put their phone number on there, and a week later, he'd call him, hey, your tape's ready.
And it'd all be with this sound, this groove.
Well,
sound.
it was it was slowly growing into that, yeah. And then it was like, okay, your tape's ready, come on over and record the shout-out at the end. And he'd record people doing a shout out at the end. And then all throughout this process, he's starting to slow stuff down. And of course, people are like, what the fuck is that? I think this tape's broke up. He's like, no, that's the way it sounds. That's what I'm doing. And so people started getting into it. And then when tapes were slowed down, that's when people really caught on. And he was moving from a series of apartments. He lived with his dad in Houston. He was moving from a series of different apartments because the traffic started increasing in his apartment because people were coming over to get tapes. And then, one apartment complex would kick him out. Now y'all got to move. And then and they moved to another one. No, y'all going to have to move from here. And so he eventually got his own house. And in his own house, he had a dedicated room where he could record. And then, so that was when people started coming over and not just recording shout outs on the tapes, but like freestyling, like come over at 10 p.m. and leave at 10 a.m., stay up all night. He'd run instrumentals on his turntables, and usually 2 copies of the same record, one copy playing a little bit behind the other one, so he could chop back and forth and repeat words, repeat verses, wind them back, whatever he wanted to do. He was real experimental with it. He loved his hands on the records, and he loved to play with them and just do different stuff, layer in other sounds, layer in other records. And so part of that was people coming over his house and freestyling on those tapes. Some of them were aspiring rappers. Some of them were people who were just rapping in the street, hit me with your verses. What do you got? Everybody had, back in the day, everybody had some bars. Yeah. And eventually those tapes started getting out, and people started hearing those tapes, and they're hearing, they're hearing Yellowstone, they're hearing South Park, they're hearing Cloverland or Sunnyside. They're hearing their neighborhoods shouted out on the tapes. I want to say, what's up to everybody from Sunnyside? Yeah. What's up everybody Dead End? South Acres, where Scarface is from. So people started hearing that, and then they're starting to identify with these voices that they're hearing on the tape. Lil Kiki, Fat Pat, C-Note, Dirty Red, Botany Boys, all these. And so the rappers started to, become superstars in their own neighborhoods. And then, as we're going through the years, they start getting record deals. They're on more and more Screw tapes. The Screw tapes have become more and more popular. People are driving to DJ Screw's house. Now it's a house. And they pull up their cars. Okay, 7 to 8 p.m. y'all can buy tapes. Yeah. And they'd line up, and there'd be cars a mile long lined up at his house. They'd pull up, run up, walk up the lawn to the gate. Which one do you want? I want two tapes with Fat Pat, and one tape of Lil Kiki, or whatever it was, or I want that, whatever tapes they wanted, okay, and then they'd pay for them. DJ Screw would take the money, and somebody else would run the tapes up to them, and then they'd leave, and the next car would pull up, and he'd sell them, and could make $10,000 in a night. He'd make a lot of money. Yeah, he'd make a lot of money in one night just from his house. So police come around, they're kicking the door down, they're thinking he's selling something illegal, which he was. It was other people's music on his mixtapes, but there was a sort of
copyrighted music.
Yeah, but there was there was also a permissiveness in relationship to the record labels, because they're like, oh, well, this guy's putting our music on his tapes and he's reselling it. Well, he's kind of fucking it up in the process. He's slowing it down. I don't know what he's doing there. All I know is we're selling more records in the South. So, a lot of people, that's the way they loved hearing it. I want to hear it screwed. I want to hear that music screwed.
Because you'd hear an artist you like and then go out and buy the official album, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Because he would never screw a whole album. It was always a song here, a song there, that sort of thing, and it got people turned on to other artists that way. Yeah. Okay. So that anyway. But to just kind of shorten his story up, so that grew. The people who were featured on the screw tapes started getting their own record deals and starting their own careers, and it was just a big build of a whole movement that was behind him. Okay. And then he passed away in November of 2000.
So do people think that because he did syrup,
yeah,
which is what codeine
promethazine
mixed with
poured over ice,
okay,
with a real sugary soda water,
okay,
like a Big Red or a Big Blue,
okay,
or something like that. Yeah.
Do you or do people believe that that's why the music was slowed down, or is that just something he came?
No,
across?
it's not why the music was slowed down. But like Paul Wall says in the book, it's like wine with steak. Like it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
You know. And so, but this is something that was happening in Houston for decades. You know, people were drinking. You know, people were recreationally consuming cough syrup in Houston for decades before that. They were drinking them with beer. They would drink it with wine. They would drink it with wine coolers. And by the time the 90s came around and they were talking about it on screw tapes, they were drinking it with soda. But that was part of what led to its popularity was not that they were making it popular, but just that they were doing it. And they were talking about, well, you know, they were also talking about the candy paint on their car. They were also talking about the swangers on their wheels. They're also talking about the headrests in their cars or whatever it was they were doing, you know. And so the syrup was just part of that. Okay. And so people picked up on it through that. But it existed long before that. People just started to make that connection. Oh yeah, when you listen to Screw's tapes and you drink the lean, you know, it's called lean, drank, syrup, it's codeine, promethazine, it's all the same thing. Then you know, it mixes really well, you know, which is true, but you know, I can vouch for the fact that if you smoke marijuana and listen to his tapes, that also works. You know, the tapes are their own drug.
Yeah. So why do you think that Houston music never broke out in the same way that East Coast and West Coast?
Because there's no industry. There's no music industry there.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have that same support. You know, the East Coast music industry wasn't interested in Houston. East Coast music industry wasn't interested in the West Coast. You know, West Coast carved it out for themselves. The difference is the West Coast is in L.A.
Yeah.
You know, or even San Francisco, where there is a music industry. You know, or at least a lot closer resources to that sort of thing. You didn't have that in Houston. In Houston, your music industry is country and western. You know, it's or to a degree blues.
Yeah.
Or Zydeco, but not hip hop, not even rock music, even with a band like ZZ Top being from Houston. So, you know, Rap-A-Lot was the template. Rap-A-Lot was the blueprint. You know, when James Prince wanted to start releasing records, you know, he wasn't trying to get record deals with some record company in LA or New York. It wouldn't even have been LA at that point. You know, in 1985, 86, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on. And I guess there was stuff coming out of LA, but not in the same way as it was from New York. So he's just like, I'm going to do this myself. And, you know, for him, it was used car lot money. Maybe that money came from somewhere else before that. But people saw that you could take money from wherever it was. If it was street money, if it was dirty money, if it was drug money, doesn't matter. Take it, invest in studio time, invest in artists. Maybe that artist is you. Maybe you're out there selling dope. Maybe you can rap, you know? And so for some people, that was the case. For some other people, that wasn't. But it was like, no, but I'm going to use this to clean my money up. Just, you know, really, really worked for a lot of people. So when you have that sort of independent, you know, mindset, why would you go try to get a deal in New York or LA where you're going to cut what you're going to make on that record down to like a tenth?
Yeah.
You know, like say you're out there selling tapes or CDs or records for $10 a pop, you know, and, you know, it costs you couple $3 to make it, you're making $7-8 on each one.
Yeah.
That's good money. And then you go sign with a record label and you're getting what, $1? It's about what it is though. I mean, it really is. It's a, you know, and that they didn't even adjust that really that much for when they started making CDs. You know, you weren't getting that much more money. CDs were way more expensive. They were way cheaper to produce, and artists still got the same amount. So people in Houston were wise to this because they had to be. Because, you know, like Bun B talks about in the book, he's like, he had no choice but to get wise to it because nobody was coming around Houston sniffing around, you know, not as a town, you know, maybe they came and they'd signed individual artists here and there to a degree, but, Ghetto Boys obviously were on a major label, but they weren't coming around and looking at Houston as a city.
Okay.
So they had to do it on their own.
Yeah. What do you want people to come away with from the book, reading the book? Not just the music, but Houston as a culture.
I'd love for them to realize there's a lot more out there than you know. And so Houston was written off for so long. People are, it's country, they ride horses, they're cowboys, they don't make hip hop down there. Well, no, they do. And it's a subculture, and it's a it's a thriving subculture, and it's a thriving subculture of, wonderful artists and, fantastic music for decades, and so I hope people take that away from it, that for it to open their eyes up to, you don't know everything. I didn't know everything. I lived in that city for, a decade and a half before I started this project, and it opened my eyes to how much of an undercurrent there is, and how much there is out there that you don't realize. So I hope there's that, but I also hope that people take away something personal from the stories, the personal stories of the people in the book. We talk a lot about hip hop. We talk a lot about gangster rap in particular. We talk a lot about that process, but we also talk. There's a lot of personal stories in there, people's journeys to get where they are. There's a lot of hindsight, a lot of the artists in the book we're talking about, we started the books 2004, 2005, and we just rewound from that point. That was right when the big wave hit Houston, and, Slim Thug, Mike Jones, Paul Wall, all the Chameleon Air, all that broke right after we started the books. And so we sort of said, okay, well, let's just go backwards, because we could never possibly understand the context from this point on. There's going to be a whole flood of artists that come in, and it's going to be a whole different thing, and newer artists. But what we really had to our advantage is that, the people we were talking to had been around for decades. They were in their 30s, their 40s. They had all this hindsight. They weren't kids anymore. They'd been through these crazy arcs to their lives. These crazy story arcs of stuff, redemption, tragedy. I always talk about Wood. One of the interviews in the book, when he talks about his mother becoming addicted to crack cocaine. He loses his father. He loses his house. He's dealing crack. He just turns his own. He's 13, 14 years, 15 years old, and he turns his house into a crack house, just so he can run it and nobody else. And now, all these years later, his mother's no longer addicted to crack. She's okay. But he's like, you can't wash away what drugs does to people.
He'll never have the mother that he had.
I'll never have the mother I have, but, you just got to look at it and okay, well, I cut my losses and I'm here, So I really hope that those kinds of stories resonate with people, and especially people who might not have thought they had anything at all in common with gangster rappers. Well, yeah, maybe you do.
Yeah. That's great, dude. So, best place for people to keep up with you online, get the book, which everyone should get the book. It's wonderful.
I would love that. I would love LanceScottWalker.com. Okay. I got links to all kinds of independent booksellers and non-independent booksellers and libraries. There's links to all kinds of university and school libraries where you can find the book. And I do a radio show, Houston Rap Tapes Radio. All of that is linked on there. Okay. So, yeah, that's the resource.
Okay. And a few classic Houston rap album singles that people should check out.
Hit That Radio Show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
that's
I've got
primer.
I've got a 7.5 hour mix. I've got a almost 7 hour mix. I've got about a 5 hour mix on there. Okay. Those are good places to start, because that'll give you a good cross section of everything that is Houston.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Lance. This was wonderful.
Appreciate it.
And there you have it, my conversation with Lance Scott Walker. Make sure you get the book, Houston Rap Tapes, available everywhere, and check out his website, lancescottwalker.com. I am online at talkmusictalk.com for more podcast information and to stream every single episode. And you can also follow me on Instagram at thisisboice. If you enjoyed this episode with Lance, some call to actions for you. Please share it on social media. Again, If you enjoy this episode with Lance, I have some call to actions for you. Please share it on social media, email it to a friend, or leave that 5-star rating and or review wherever you happen to be listening, especially on iTunes, because this all helps to grow the Talk Music Talk audience. There is also a Talk Music Talk app. It is free and available wherever you like to get your apps for both iPhone and Android. Or you can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, pretty much everywhere. Just search for Talk Music Talk. And there's more. You can also find the podcast on SoundCloud, starting with episode 100. That is at soundcloud.com/This Is Boice. You can also check out the music that I make there. So do that right when you finish listening to this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.